Good morning. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence. What is it? What value does it bring? And why should we care? Now, we've all heard or read something about emotional intelligence. It's been around since around 1964. It was a paper by Michael Bell-Dutch, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Michael. From 1964 to 1995, there were multiple studies and research papers on this topic, but it was pretty much limited to researchers in the academic world. The term became popular in 1995 with the book Emotional Intelligence, written by science journalist Daniel Goleman. And again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. There have been many iterations and many authors on this topic. Now, when I first heard the term, it was around the mid-1990s. I was a high-tech executive, and an HR manager came up to me and said, "Frank, what do you think of this emotional intelligence?" And I said, "I don't know what it is, but what is it? How does it work? Is it going to help us? What's the training like? How long is it going to take to implement?" Basic CEO type questions. At first, I was sitting there and I was wondering, is it going to be another trendy, buzzy word that we're going to talk about and sounds good in the moment, but that it doesn't last? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's lasted. Yet most people still don't have a good understanding of what it is and why it's important and how to make it work in their organization. Well, today, we're going to find out. My guest is my friend, Teresa Quinlan, and she knows a great deal about emotional intelligence and its value in the workplace. She's the founder of IQ+EQ TQ, and she's going to go into that in more depth in a little bit. She helps build emotionally intelligent companies. She does executive coaching and leadership development. Teresa, all the way from Ontario, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thanks for having me, Frank. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
It's our pleasure. I've been watching, Teresa's been putting out a series of small clips touching base on this. And if you haven't seen them, get on LinkedIn and look them up because she's really good. So Teresa, tell the viewers a little bit about your journey. How did you evolve to where you are here?
Well, I grew up in a big family, one of 4 kids, and I'm second oldest. And big family, meaning by my extended family, was very big. And anyone who's grown up in a big family knows that oftentimes when you're in a big family environment, you need to establish your space in that environment. Yes. If you want any attention, if you want any recognition, you need to establish that space. And fortunately for me, there seemed to be lots of room for space. There was lots of room for each person to exist, to have a voice. But in that space, your voice was expected to sound a certain way and look a certain way and be a certain way. And when it wasn't, someone let you know that that wasn't the way it was supposed to be, and then tried to manipulate or coerce, sometimes influence the way in which you were developing. And I think all of us, whether big family, small family, big spaces, small spaces, can resonate with this type of experience. That we had in some of our life places situations where we were recognized and validated, and in other situations we weren't. And so I grew up in this environment, as many people do, of trying to navigate that space, of having relationships with people where they did see me and validated me, and I felt confident, and I felt my esteem, and I could speak my voice, and I could share my emotions. And then I had other situations where I needed to pretend to be a different way in order to get that recognition or validation. And sometimes I was in relationships where I didn't care if I got the recognition or validation. I was just going to be me no matter what. And, you know, when you're younger, people will tell you that behaving in that way, when you're standing in your own space and not really listening to what other people are telling you about how you're behaving, is called sass. So as I grew up, I was called sassy quite a bit. And as I grew up, what I learned was tact was an important part of when you're going to stand in your authenticity and then try to communicate that with other people. The way in which you did it was so much more important than what you were saying. How you were saying it, how you were interacting with other people was so much more important. And so for me, in my early 20s, I really started to navigate the space of why in some situations I was able to show up with that tact, and in other situations I was not able to show up with that. And in exploring that, I really had to look at the interaction between myself and my mother and examine that relationship and examine all of the emotional underpinnings of that relationship in order for me to understand my emotions, how they were impacting me in those situations, then how they impacted other people, and inevitably how they impacted our ability to be together, to work together, to have conversations, to agree to disagree, all of those kinds of things that we look to do with other people.
Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting you made this point. It's emotional intelligence is not happy talk. It's not being happy all the time. Correct?
Right.
It's
correct.
I'm not happy, I'm upset, but how do I deal with this? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Any emotion. I mean, as human beings, one of the beautiful things about being a human is that we experience the emotional spectrum. How each of us is impacted by those emotions and feels it in our body and then expresses it is unique to each of us as an individual. So, for example, when you're happy, happiness might look a little different on you and impact you differently than it looks on me and impacts me. And so emotional intelligence is about understanding which emotion I'm experiencing and why. So what triggers it? All of the associations I have with that emotion. So when I experience joy, I associate that emotion with all of my life experiences that triggered joy.
Mm-hmm.
And associated to all of those experiences are people and thinking and actions. That's a lot of history that comes to one singular emotion.
That's right.
And in that moment, I then behave through all of those things. And if I'm not emotionally self-aware, what ends up happening is the emotion drives the behavior instead of informing the behavior.
Great point. Great point. Let's get right to the two questions I hear from executives still to this day, right?
Yeah.
What is emotional intelligence and why should they care?
Yeah. So emotional intelligence is a set of skills. Anybody can learn them. And the foundational skill is emotional self-awareness. So I've mentioned it a few times. Quite specifically, it is, do I know which emotion I'm experiencing, how it's impacting me and the people around me? Then once I'm aware, then I can start to regulate and learn management strategies. So we have skills in emotional intelligence that teach us how to manage our emotional state so that the emotion becomes data or information instead of the emotion being the directive. You're angry, yell. You're happy, smile. So more often than not, what ends up happening is we might be aware of certain emotions 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 days after we've had the experience. And then we become aware of how it's impacted us and our behavior. And then we experience things like shame or blame or guilt or regret.
Right.
And emotional intelligence gives you the skills to recognize your emotional triggers much earlier in the process. So you have a heightened sense of emotional self-awareness. I know what triggers me. I have the skills to regulate that emotion so that instead of the emotion driving my behavior, I can keep my intellect turned on. My IQ can stay turned on. It remains accessible to me.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's accessible, then what do I get to do? I get to intentionally choose different EQ skills, different emotional intelligence skills. In some moments, I might need assertiveness. In other moments, I might need empathy. In many moments, I need both of those at the same time.
Exactly.
And so, emotional intelligence is not just about self-awareness. It's also about, can I regulate and manage? Now that I'm aware, do I regulate and manage those emotions? And then do I intentionally choose the other 14 emotional intelligence skills that are available to me to use in this moment?
I love that explanation, Teresa. Coming up when I did, because I'm older than you are, but coming up when I did, there was these meetings and things would get hostile. And then the next day there was this, oh God, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Or I wish I hadn't have said that. Or the other way around, someone comes back to you and says, I think I was out of line. It sounds like by doing this training, we can help not eliminate, because we're still people, but reduce the number of those kind of conversations. Is that right?
Yes, reduce, minimize, and course correct a lot faster. So for example, a few weeks ago, I flew off the handle. I was triggered under the emotion of anger as a core emotion. And that emotional rising happened quick enough that it hijacked my behavior. So I reacted in the emotion instead of pausing to regulate and think. And so I said things I normally wouldn't say in a way I don't usually say them. And when the words flew out of my mouth, it's like I could see them coming out of my mouth, and my inability to manage them in the moment was like trying to grab them as they were escaping me and pull them back in. And so as soon as they flew out of my mouth, I excused myself from the environment. I took about 3 minutes to breathe, to regulate my emotions, to challenge my thinking that was driving my emotional state, because what I was thinking about was not true or accurate. It was just exceptional fiction writing.
Mm-hmm.
And to return into the environment and apologize within about 3 minutes, return to the environment and offer the apology for my behavior. I didn't apologize for the fact that I was angry. I apologized for how I behaved in the anger and owned responsibility for it.
That's a huge point. It's a huge point that the emotion is okay, and it's okay to feel it, but it's not okay to react out of the emotion, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of behaviors that are inappropriate behaviors. So it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to name call, to roll your eyes, to bully, to yell, to swear, to blame. Those things aren't okay. So we have behavioral boundaries that we place, but not emotional boundaries.
That's wonderful. Now, you were in leadership very young in your life, in your career.
Mm-hmm.
And did you see this how did you bring emotional intelligence into your organization before it was really popular?
Well, first I brought it in by, I think, example. So when I was 24, I had an interaction with my brother-in-law, who at the time wasn't my brother-in-law. He's my sister's boyfriend. And I had known him for almost a year before he started dating my sister and then coming into our family environment.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came into the family environment for the first time, he saw me interacting with my mom. And he literally took me aside and said to me, he's like, "What is wrong with you? I have never seen you behave like this with anybody. What is going on?" And it was not the first time that someone had said this to me. And I heard myself say, "I don't know. I mean, I hear this all the time, but I can't help myself when I'm around her." Basically, he's like, "Why are you being such an asshole?" I was like, I can't help myself. And I don't know what it was about this moment. Perhaps it was just the right time, the right space. I mean, life happens for a reason. And in this moment, I heard myself say it and I went, hang on a second. That's a load of BS. Of course, I could do something about it. And so I immediately went to the bookstore, because that's where I go when I need to learn something. Mm-hmm. And I figured there's something I don't know how to do. So I went to the bookstore and I looked in the self-help section. Now, this would have been about 1996.
Right.
And I went to the self-help section because that's what it was called then. And that's where these kinds of books live. And one of the books facing outward was called Mama Drama. And I was like, that's perfect. And I grabbed it. And I like to start reading books in the bookstore to know if, this is the book I want. And in the first few pages, it mentioned two things. Nobody makes you feel anything. You choose. Mm-hmm. And the other one was stop giving away your power. Every time you emotionally react to someone and then behave poorly, you're giving away all of your power. And those two things really played to who I thought I was at the time. I like that idea of I have personal ownership and choice. That felt like I have a choice. Okay, if I get to choose, then I can manage it. And if I can manage it, then, well, number one, I can no longer blame her for it. It's my responsibility. But also what she does doesn't have to impact me. I can separate from that. And that whole concept just sort of lit me up from the inside out. I was so excited. And then the reality set in, because it is bloody hard work. Emotional intelligence development is a game of inches. You do a little bit better today than you did yesterday. Mm-hmm. You do a little bit better tomorrow than the day before. And then you have a blowout and you feel like, damn it, I'm not getting it. And then you have 3 interactions with the person or people who trigger you, and you do pretty good with those. And then you have one where you blow up and you think, damn it, I'm not getting it. But the truth is, every time you practice your EQ skills, you are flexing that muscle and you're getting better and better and better. So I embarked on the journey myself, and from 1 book led to 2 books, led to 3 books, led to 4 books. So then we're looking at Daniel Goleman's work and Travis Bradberry's work. And then as I was in the professional environment, this influenced how I led. I understood people better. So it influenced how I led. It shifted how I would have weekly meetings, how I would have team meetings, who I would assign projects to, how I would partner people together, how I would interview and hire people. It changed literally everything that I was doing in the workplace, because in essence, it changed who I was. And it changed how I saw things like leadership and understood people and the impact of their emotions on performance. So once I understood that line, then watching how people performed, underperformed was informed under like, oh, this person's emotionally unwell, and that's what's impacting their performance. So if I can help coach them to a state of well-being by helping to coach them to see what's influencing their emotional state, then I can influence their performance. I can't make them stretch for a goal if they can't even get out of bed in the morning.
Right. That's a great example. So Teresa, you left the corporate world.
I did.
And you became your own operation and your brand. And I love this. I want you to explain it. IQ plus EQ equals TQ. What is that?
So, in the years of studying and practicing emotional intelligence, something that I came to understand was, and Daniel Goleman says it, often your EQ can matter more than your IQ. Correct. And at first I thought, what the heck does that mean? And then in my own personal exploration, and then in seeing it other people, very often you experience that when people rub you the wrong way, you don't stick around to find out how smart they are. You don't actually care. You don't care what comes out of their mouth.
Exactly.
You don't care to ask them questions. You don't care to find out if they've got great ideas because you don't want to spend any time with them. And early in my career, on occasion, I would get some feedback that sounded like that, where people were saying, I feel intimidated around Teresa. And my natural inclination was like, well, that's not my problem. I mean, grow a little self-confidence. And then, of course, you hear yourself say that and you go, hang on a second here. You're giving me some important information about there's something that I do in how I behave, how I stand, how I speak, that's rubbing them the wrong way. And I'm not paying attention to a social cue that they're giving that says you're rubbing me the wrong way right now, regardless of the fact that they might have to work on their self-regard.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. And so those pieces of such valuable insight that people were willing to say, even if it was anonymous, they were willing to say it, allowed me to start taking a look at that relationship between how I show up is critical to people wanting to hear what's going on intellectually.
Yes.
And if I can learn and continue to bridge that gap of connecting on the emotional quotient level first, then we could pretty much talk about anything at any time, anywhere. But without that, it's very hard to navigate into that intellectual space.
Right. That's a great point. Now, are you still hearing this? The CEOs my age, people that I still know that are in the corporate side, they keep saying, or they don't always say, they're getting better, but I still hear it. Keep your emotions out of the workplace. Mm-hmm. How do you address that?
Well, there's a couple ways to address it, really. Firstly, when someone says that, the initial thing is to just ask more questions, because it's really easy to judge where it might be coming from and Correct. Say, you're wrong. That is BS. All of the research, all of the literature, everything that's out there is saying human beings come to work as human beings, and with them comes everything that they are. So to try and ask people to leave their emotions out of the workplace includes all emotions out of the workplace. Mm-hmm. And what is creativity?
It's an emotion.
Creativity, yes, sparks out of emotion. What's motivation? It sparks out of emotion. What's innovation? It sparks. What's collaboration? All of these things spark out of the foundation of an emotional state first. Mm-hmm. So if we leave our emotions out of the workplace, we don't get any of that. How do people manage failure? That sparks from an emotional intelligence space. And if you want innovation, you need failure. So you need all of, in short, Frank, of course, we need all of it in the workspace. So the first thing that I generally do is navigate the space of why, what, when, where. Has this been something that they've believed for a long time, all the time? Have they read anything differently? Have they felt any differently before? When have their emotions shown up in the workplace and helped them? When have their emotions shown up in the workplace and hindered them? And so exploring the conversation with them is really important to do, because oftentimes that statement is an affront. It's not the truth. It's just a front. And it is sometimes, maybe 80% of the time, rooted out of believing that emotions are the downfall, and that if we just remove them, then we'll be successful.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to understanding that emotions, yes, can be the downfall, but emotional intelligence is what rescues you from that.
Mm-hmm.
So because we can't remove emotions from the workplace. You could say it, but it never happens.
Right.
You can say it all you want. No emotions are allowed in here, and everyone's bringing it with them, but they're just trying to lock them down and hide them. To what detriment? Well-being, burnout, everyone's taking sick days, underperformance, lack of engagement. Like, these are the things we measure in the workplace, and then we bring in a ping pong table and say, well, that'll do it.
Exactly.
Everything is some free coffee and a game to play.
Exactly.
But then COVID came along and pushed everyone into their home environment and demonstrated very clearly, perhaps even ending the debate, that emotions impact performance. When people feel unwell, they're incapable of performing. So I'm now working at home. Home is my workplace. So where do my emotions go now?
Right. Good point. Good point. Now, for decades in the corporate world, the model was always, and I came from the military also, so there was always focus on the work, not on the people. And what we found, or what I found, or the world's found, is 70% of new programs or projects fail. And I heard you say this. You said, before you roll out what needs to be done, have you talked to the people who are actually doing the work? Are you seeing that old model start to change?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many executives that I work with that get that, like logically they get it, and then emotionally they struggle with it, right? So
Exactly.
they get that. Yes, I get that people are the foundation of anything we get done here. And then emotionally they struggle with, but then I have to connect with people, and then I have to relate to people, and then I have to allow people to bring their emotions into the environment. And I'm not comfortable with that, because let's just keep following that thought, because then I'm going to have to talk to them about their emotions and help them solve their emotions. And I'm going to be responsible for their emotions. And that's where we get stuck, is thinking people bring their emotions and I got to fix them. No. People bring their emotions, and you need to be very clear with empathy and assertiveness, those two EQ skills together. They are personally responsible for their emotions. They are responsible for their performance. What I'm here to do as an executive, as a leader, is to create the environment for those things to exist. So if I don't create the environment for you to speak about your emotions and for us to navigate them and understand how they're impacting you, and then set clear expectations on what is performance, and then ask, so if you're here for performance and I need you to be up here, and the gap is your emotional state, then how are you going to be personally responsible to adjust your emotional state so your performance can elevate? And this is where we place in the hands of people the responsibility for things like sleeping well, eating well, exercising, meditating, strong relationships, understanding their own emotions, self-actualizing, engaging in hobbies that contribute to their well-being. We are not responsible to fix it for them. And that is the narrative that a lot of companies get stuck in, and why they resist emotions in the workplace, and also why they resist bringing emotional intelligence into the workplace. Because they have this, dare I say, ridiculous, because I've heard it, ridiculous vision that emotional intelligence in the workplace means we're going to sit in circles and sing songs together, or the extreme, people are going to be rocking themselves crying in a corner. Like I say it and I laugh because I'm like, that's ridiculous. And yet that is what might be happening in the workplace right now. It's people are rocking themselves in a corner crying because they're so emotionally unwell and they don't feel like they belong. They don't feel like they can speak to anyone. They don't feel like their leaders or managers are caring about them, that they're just a number that needs to hit a goal. And unless they hit the goal, they're not valuable. Yeah.
I've seen that. That's the world that I came up in, was all a numbers based, and you're replaceable, and we'll move somebody else into the world. And then I also found, and maybe this is something CEOs are trying to finally becoming aware of, is your best people leave.
Yes.
They say, I'm not putting up with this. And now your high performers are saying, I don't need this nonsense. They leave. Now you've got some emotionally challenged individuals who don't have the skill sets. Is that something you bring up as you're talking with these executive levels? You say it nicer than that, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I think clear is kind. So they all have the data. They already have the data and the metrics that they're measuring. My job in conversation is to help them see the direct line from those measurable outcomes, their KPIs, down to the foundation of emotional intelligence. Because often what will happen is companies will decide, we're just going to go with some traditional leadership training. So we're going to train on time management, and we're going to train on, the 4 stages of coaching someone, and we're going to train on this feedback method that comes out of Belgium. And I'm just like, oh, if another process comes on our plate, we're going to drown under it, because if we don't have the foundational emotional intelligence skills, we can't execute on those 4 steps. I used to deliver a crucial accountability course through Vital Smarts as a certified trainer. And crucial accountability is, how do we have those difficult conversations with people, like you violated an expectation, you behaved poorly, you broke a promise. Those are tough conversations to have.
yes, they are.
And the beginning stages of this training are called Start with Heart. And it was very much overlooked what that actually meant. Because what it meant is, like, get your story straight and connect with your intention. If you're in a leadership role, why are you in that leader role? Are you there to elevate other people? Are you there to coach other people to great performance? Like, why are you in that job? Might you be there because you like recognition? You want more responsibility? As a leader, you have to know why you're in that job, because doing certain things will be very difficult if you don't have the right intention under leadership. And so when we start with heart, we're basically asking ourselves to check in with your emotional state. What's impacting your ability, your intention, your desire to step into this conversation? Someone violated an expectation. You had a clear conversation. Are you going in angry, irate, frustrated, and you're ready to tear their head off? How well do you think that's going to go? And what's super interesting is, in traditional leadership training, they get straight to so these are the 10 steps in an accountability conversation. Number 1, tell them what they did wrong. Number 2, ask them why it went wrong. Number 3, listen. All of a sudden you're like, so they told them. If we were to videotape, you would have watched them telling them, and everyone would be cringing, going, ooh. That's either way too beat around the bush, or that's way too aggressive, or that was a little passive aggressive, because the individual doesn't have emotional self-awareness to manage that. And so the way they speak is rubbing that other person the wrong way. So what do you think is going to happen to the other person?
They recoil.
That's right. They might go silent and start to protect, or they might, depending on their personality, they might just stand up and throw some back at you.
Yep.
Now, in all likelihood, we're now doing this. And when we do this, we don't usually use our IQ. We don't usually step into problem solving or coaching or communication in really effective ways. What we end up doing is we end up tarnishing the relationship.
Yes.
And under tarnishing the relationship, what happens to me as the employee? I disengage from work. I withhold. I use discretionary effort, might even sabotage. I start looking for another job. I give the bare ass minimum when I go to work. And what happens to you as a leader? You get frustrated. You don't like your job. You feel like you're always the heavy hand. You don't get support. And so it becomes something that's like, well, no wonder we have workplace experiences. No wonder we have studies that say North America retention or employee engagement numbers is at like 38%. It's tragic.
It is. It's terrible. One of the things I saw coming through the ranks as I was moving up, and I hope it's changing, is you're a real good individual contributor. So we're going to make you a manager. We want you to clone these people to be you. But the training, and this is the thing that drove me nuts, the training was by fire hose. We're going to send you away for 4 days. They're going to bombard you with this stuff. You're going to come back with a stack of books this high that you're never going to open. And, well, how come you can't lead? So as leadership training seems to be the key here. Is that what you see?
Yeah, absolutely. And even before the training, it's how do we decide who is the leader? Who's the next leader? Because then the training becomes really simple. It really does. It becomes a heck of a lot simpler. I mean, we spend trillions of dollars in training leadership year over year over year, and we wonder why it's so expensive. Most of the time, we're sending the wrong people to leadership training. And oftentimes, they have to go back to the training because they can't execute on what's being asked of them. So we keep sending them to training thinking that, oh, they still can't manage or delegate, and they still can't do any strategic thinking or planning, and they still can't hold people accountable or coach people to better performance or project manage and organize. It's not because they don't understand the 10 steps. It's because emotionally they're incapable of doing those kinds of things. So I believe one of the critical things we have to do better in leadership is the criteria with which we determine who the next leader is. And right now, we're not really looking at emotional intelligence enough as critical skills to move into leadership. We're looking too much at performance of the job compared to the qualities of a great leader to lead other people. Exactly.
I love that answer. Now, Teresa, you talk a great deal about the importance of mantra. Did I get that right? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Anytime we find ourselves in a situation where the emotions are elevating, and everyone knows physically what that often feels like. You know, if we're heading towards emotions that are volatile, we would notice our energy comes up and we start to feel very unpleasant. And so physically, that unpleasantness manifests itself with a furrowed eyebrow, perhaps red cheeks, maybe our palms start to sweat. Maybe even we start to feel tension across our chest as anger is rising and we can feel it choking ourselves. And so when we start to have the uprising of an emotion, our body physically feels it first. And as soon as that cycle begins, the next thing that follows is our thinking. So remember earlier, I was describing emotional intelligence as emotion and then narrative. Everything we associate with anger or with that emotion, frustration, agitation, rage. And all of a sudden, our brain starts to cycle our thoughts around this person, this event, this emotion. And we do this exceptional storytelling of, I can't believe this person is doing this to me. How dare that happen here? No way someone's going to get in my way. I'm going to make something different come out of this, and I'm not going to let any of that impact me. And so what we end up doing is we let our narrative drive our emotional experience, and it becomes this negative cyclone or spiral of emotional trigger, thought that drives a stronger emotion, another thought that drives the emotion even stronger until we become hijacked in our emotional thinking, and then we behave in a really poor way. So emotional intelligence is our capacity to disrupt that cycle all the way up to the triggering event. Most of us are starting at the bottom and trying to identify what are the behaviors that I need to change. And then what's the thought or emotional state that's just before that behavior? And then what's the emotion and the thought? So we reverse the spiral. And mantras have a really powerful impact to catching that negative spiral and shifting our thought process. Because if we can shift the thought process, what we're doing is we're challenging our fiction writing. Where's the proof that what I just thought about is actually true? In this moment, it can't be true, because this thought that happened can only be something I thought of or have had already cycling in my brain, which means it's from the past. And it might also be something I'm projecting forward based on all of my past experiences and my beliefs and my values. I'm projecting forward that what's happening right now is going to lead to that, but I don't know that's what it's going to lead to. So a mantra in anger, Brene Brown has this great one that she shares. She's like, don't talk, text, or type. That's her mantra. So as soon as she experiences anger and that physical manifestation of it, she repeats that mantra to herself, which disrupts the thinking cycle and has her focus on evidence-based assessment, perhaps, or focuses on, hang on a second, what's the most generous assumption I could give of this person's character and their intention? And as soon as you shift the thinking, you'll notice a couple of things happen. One, our pace begins to change. Two, when our pace changes, we give ourselves an opportunity to breathe. And when we get the opportunity to breathe, we physiologically start to manage our body. So if I take a deep breath in and I exhale, the first thing I might notice is, wow, it's really hard for me to take a deep breath in because my emotion is choking me. So my breath is really high in my head, which generally means my thinking is disrupted. So if I take another deep breath in and out, and I focus on dropping the breath into my body, trying to get it to my chest, and then I do a third breath and I try to get it, to my diaphragm. Then I take another breath and I try to get the breath all the way to my belly button. In 4 breaths, which might be 12 seconds, I've shifted the physiology of my emotions. No longer am I heated and up in my head and ready to explode. I'm now calm and centered. And when I'm calm and centered in my physiology, my brain works differently. All of a sudden, I'm clearer. And I'm probably clearer in perhaps values. I'm clearer in, here's a good opportunity for me to use empathy. I'm clearer in, this is a problem I can't solve on my own. I'm going to need to ask for help. I'm clearer in, wow, I got really triggered there. For what reason? None. It's a good thing I took a couple breaths to manage that, because if I would have behaved in that, that would have totally disrupted everything going on and left no chance to problem solve, innovate, strengthen a relationship.
That is so interesting. I work with a number of veterans, United States veterans, war veterans, suffering from PTSD and TBI, and that's exactly the same thing we try to stress to them. Breathe, breathe. That happened in Iraq. You're not in Iraq. Breathe. Let's get our thoughts together again. Well, this has been amazing, Teresa. We're starting to run out of time here. So what final thoughts do you want to leave with the viewers around the world here today?
I think you mentioned it in the introduction when you kicked off, and it was in the 90s when you heard of emotional intelligence and you went, ooh, I hope, like nail biting situation. I hope it's not one of those words or phrases that becomes this like buzz thing, and people think that it's something to be talked about. It's also really important that emotional intelligence is not something that we intellectualize. We can't read about it and become more emotionally intelligent. You're not more emotionally intelligent from watching this episode either. You might be more aware of, oh, this thing's got some roots to it. Maybe I should start practicing emotional self-awareness, which is the foundation of our emotional intelligence. And then there's like 14 other skills in EQ. And so what I would offer up to the audience is remembering that everything you need to become more emotionally intelligent is within you. We have all the skills. At one point or another, we've probably even used them. We're just not using them enough. And we become more emotionally intelligent by practicing our emotional intelligence, by catching ourselves in behavior that is not our true self. our behavior that is driven by an emotional state, and catching it and course correcting. And what I mean by course correcting is really like literally stop. You might be mid-sentence and you just stop yourself from talking because, you know, there's part of you that's watching yourself doing it going, stop. Like you can hear that little whisper of a voice going, what are you doing? Stop. Get a hold of yourself, man or woman. And you hear the voice and your ego prevents you from really paying attention. Just like, no, keep going. You're right. You got to be right. You got to win this one. So that little voice is your emotional intelligence voice speaking to you, perhaps very silently right now, what it is you need to do to course correct. And a lot of the times it's like, stop. And so every time you get that inclination of maybe I shouldn't be doing this, I would suggest follow the inclination, like hard stop, and look at the other person if you're across from them and just say, I need a minute. You might even say, like I did early on a lot, I apologize. This is not my intention, and I need a minute. And then when your minute is done, re-engage in what you're doing. Or when your minute is done, you might not re-engage. You might excuse yourself. But that minute that we ask for, that's when we are breathing, when we're regulating our emotions, when we're giving ourselves and the other person the time that is needed to keep the emotion from ruining the interaction.
I love that. That was part of the training we had in high-level negotiation. When it starts to overwhelm, pause. Let's take a break. Let's step outside. Let's get it back together again and come back when we're in a mindset that we can work. I love that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Teresa Quinlan for this was just an absolutely dynamic show, Teresa. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what life throws at you, and it's going to throw a lot at you, please do 3 things. Look up, get up, never, ever give up. Keep moving forward, and better times and better people will come into your life. If you'd like more information about Teresa, you can contact me or go to her website directly. If you come to me, I'll make sure it gets to her. You can see this on ROKU TV or on my YouTube page, Frank Zaccari. If you go to the YouTube page, please subscribe. I will also send the links to Teresa, and she'll post it at all the places that she puts out her information. Now, let me leave you with this, ladies and gentlemen. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Teresa showed us where many of those rocks are. Join me again next week. We'll talk about another life-altering event. Thank you.